when you live in um, societies that are governed by ideologies of whiteness, and likely many of us, not all of us, but many of us, our ancestries are traced respectively to colonized people, were the ancestors of slaves, and we pass on now generationally all kinds of traumas, as well as like psyches and minds that are colonized. You'd want to think just what are some of the things that come up, within that, especially as it relates to whiteness, that, you know, white supremacy is very much so the opposite of the Sunnah, and I would say that the Sunnah is both the opposite as well as the antidote to a lot of what supremacy imposes upon societies. And they just exist in very different ways. Like it's a modern day shirk that you struggle with that's very egocentric, and it creates this rugged sense of individualism that centers the self. But for people like us, when whiteness claims to be the primordial state, it's always comparing us to it because it claims to be the norm, right? Like some of us, we're always from someplace else, no matter where we are, right? And there's some people, regardless of where they are, they're exactly where they're supposed to be. Some of us will always have a reason as to why we do some things, do you know? And there's a difference between sharing the story of the Prophet alayhi salam out of love and empowerment. And I see my Islam as an asset, not as a liability, versus through internalized racisms and self loathing, feeling as if I have to seek validation from the systems that were built to hold me down. And I think this is a very important thing for us to think about, especially in relation to the verses we were talking about. Um, there's no rahma like if you're racist, do you know? Like literally, Dr. Marwa shared a hadith about a man who wouldn't kiss, children. And the Prophet said, there's no rahma for one who has no rahma. Like, what are you gonna do if the action you're undertaking is rooted in like the essential action that casts shaitan out of Jannah? I'm of fire and you are of earth. Like, where I came from makes me better than you. Like, and Allah is most just, right? May Allah grant us ease on that day. What are we going to do if Iblis says, you kicked me out of here because I did this? Why are you letting them in for the same things? So, many people in the United States exist in two buckets of Muslim experience. Islamists thrived in Black communities that have been here, since the foundation of the country. 30% of slaves that were brought at a conservative estimate were Muslim. And Islam has existed in Black Muslim experience for quite some time. And then immigrant Muslims that came in decades ago as the country opened up a pathway to residency and wanted to inflate rankings in like science and math and engineering, etc. Many immigrant Muslims made the decision to work with white institutions as opposed to working with established Muslim communities that had been here for years. And that's something that you see some places doing differently now, but still fundamentally exist within this frame. And the idea of how you deal with ignorance, these are things that existed during the time of the Prophet ﷺ also, and they came up as people wrestled with their own transformations. But the stratification of what we deal with here is a lot of us don't even think we are racist. Do you know? Ibn Atta'illah, rahimullah, he has a hikam that paraphrased essentially says, if you think you aren't arrogant, you likely are. Do you know? But getting to a place where you start to think like, okay, not in a tokenizing way, but how do I learn the narratives of others, right? Li ta'arafu is an intimate knowing, like experiential knowledge. And how do I build that sense of love that helps me to recognize the humanness within people? So I would say you don't want to advocate or ever defend or justify or intellectualize in a way that says that just because my community says, or my grandfather said, or so and so said, racism is always haram. And when the prophet saw some of his companions struggling with certain things, he would walk with them through the struggles. And he is like by default, right? Rahmatan lil alameen. So the instances where he got upset at haram things happening, tended to be when people were being abusive or oppressive, or when people were being racist. Anger was apparent on his face, do you know? And so it's not something to take lightly. The particulars of how you navigate it again are going to be contingent on what's the outcomes, do you know? And where is their power balance that enables us to understand that speaking out in X setting might be different for someone versus someone else, the person that you are trying to offer insight to, depending on the dynamic of how ethics are situational, but also how they might receive you, in terms of the consequences to your admonition or counsel to them is going to play a role in some of these things. But I would say 100% if we're talking about how do we deal with Muslims who display characteristics of racism, like we don't validate it. It's just not ever an acceptable thing. It's always going to be something that's wrong, and we can know that it's not going to be something that is pleasing to Allah because we can see that Allah's messenger was displeased with it, apparent, like very clearly when it took place in front of him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And if it bothers your heart, at the very least, like you can take indication, your feelings are data points. They're telling you about yourself. So even when it's suffocating and stifling, and you see something wrong and your heart doesn't feel good, you can at least find solace in the fact that your heart is telling you you're in the right place, right? Because if I have a broken heart, ultimately, at least I have a heart, you know? And there's a lot of people who don't even have that kind of um, you know, sensation in some of these instances. Do you see?